Good morning, afternoon, evening to all. Well, on behalf of Swisspeace and the Catalan Agency for Development Cooperation, I would like to welcome you to this panel on archives as a tool to promote truth, memory and justice. And thank you very much for your interest in this panel. This panel is also organized to celebrate the launch of the book, The Historical Archive of the National Police of Guatemala. And the book resulted from a cooperation between the Catalan Agency for Development Cooperation, the National Archive of Catalonia, Swisspeace, the Swiss Federal Department of Foreign Affairs, and the Basque Agency for Development Cooperation. I will share the link with all of you in the chat. And during this panel, we will also hear more about the specific experience of this police archive. As the name of the panel indicates, we will deal with the topic of archives and how they contribute to truth, memory, justice, or maybe more general, how they contribute to conflict transformation, peace building, and reconciliation. And this link may not be so clear or evident to everyone. When I started, for example, at Swisspeace a few years ago, I wasn't aware of this strong link either. But I'm very pleased that we have today a very exciting panel with José Rodolfo Kepfer, Monim Adam, and Trudy Peterson. And all three have been working on, let's say, this nexus of archives, transitional justice, human rights, peace building for many years. And I'm convinced that they will give us some very interesting and exciting insights so that the contribution of archives to truth, memory, justice becomes more evident. I will introduce the panelists a little bit later, but I would like to already thank you very much for your availability to share your experiences with us today. And many thanks also to Carme Gual, the director of the Catalan Agency for Development Cooperation, who will give some introductory remarks in a minute. Before I give the floor to her, I would just briefly explain the program and make a few logistical comments. After the presentations of the panelists, we will open the floor for questions from the audience. And to ask questions to the panelists, we ask you to use the VOVA Q&A function, which is visible to attendees who join this panel via VOVA. And you should already see there 3 questions in the chat. And for people who just joined this event directly by the Zoom link, please just use the Zoom chat function. And you can post your questions from now on, and I will collect them and ask them to the panelists at the end of the panel. So that's from my side for the moment, and I would like to hand over to Carme Gual, the director of the Catalan Agency for Development Cooperation, for the opening remarks.
Thanks, Gorsin. Thanks very much for being here. Thanks, Trudy, Monim, José Rodolfo. I think it's a pleasure for all of us to be here. We are just in this kind of big event, this second World Congress, Peace Congress, International Peace Congress. And unfortunately, it's not gonna be in presence this webinar, but there are many things here going on, and it's fantastic to have this mixture of this kind of hybrid event that I think that's gonna last for more than the pandemic. I think that's gonna be a way of working in the future, much usually. Let me say that it's an honor for me to present this workshop on archives and transitional justice in the framework of this second International Peace Congress, and that we are really lucky to host here in Barcelona. And in the end, the Generalitat has been quite involved. So it's like, for us, it's very important to give the floor to all the people involved in peace around the world here in Barcelona, and have them here in Barcelona. So as I was saying, have liked to have this event to meet in person, but unfortunately it's not. It had not been possible. But on the other hand, we can have people from around the world just listening to us and following this this conversation. So it's really a pleasure to be here with the Swisspeace and as a strategic partner for us, for the Catalan Cooperation Agency. It's been a hard work. It's been a long-term work, and so Catalonia is like, for us, is like a big event to have the book that Corsin was just talking about, because we have this kind of long history accompanying the processes of peace, justice, and historical memory, especially in Central America and Colombia. Specifically in Guatemala, the Catalan agency has been accompanying practically since its discovery the historical archive of the national policy. So the archive is a documentary collection of invaluable historical, social, scientific, and judicial value. And that's been fundamental for the clarification of truth and the application of justice on the fight against impunity in this country since the starting of the recovery of the archive. In order to document this experience, the ACCD promoted the research work in 2 dimensions: the archival process, successes and challenges on the one hand, and on the other hand, the contribution of the archive to peace and reconciliation. I think that both are very important, but for us, the one that we should keep is the second one, because it's the one that gives peace a chance, for the country. The first was done in collaboration with the National Archive of Catalonia and the Department of Culture of the Generalitat de Catalunya, and the second was done with Swisspeace in Corsin, of course, which today moderates this phase and which can feel really proud to have contributed so directly to this huge work, of which we are left, we have all together in a book published in digital version, as you were saying, that it's gonna be just online, and you were just sending it in the chat for everyone to get it. And also we will have a small amount of paper version. The printed has been made possible thanks to another very close alliance of ACCD, it's the Basque Agency for Development Cooperation. And the digital, well, it's gonna be spread around by our websites, of course. So we, with today's event, would like to contribute to the presentation and dissemination of this publication, basically, which among other things aims to socialize and reach as many people as possible, to give the experience of the archive as an international reference. I think that's the work that has been done. It's very, very strong and very powerful. So we should try to make it known for any other context to be used, if possible. The challenges remain. We know that, and they are very big ones. But I think that we have to enrich the process with talking with other projects similar or that are working with the same kind of questions. No, so I think that thanks, Corsin. Maybe the debates. Let's see if it's enriching, and I take this opportunity to invite the speakers and the audience to participate in other activities that are online on the Congress. That I think that's very powerful, and so your word and your voices should be also listened in other parts of this big event. So just I leave it here. Thank you very much, and just hope to listen to you, and very happy to be here with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much for these opening remarks, and I do hope that we will hear more also, well, from the police archives in Guatemala, but also from other experiences around the world, how archives have been used to foster, let's say, peace-building initiatives in the respective countries. Now I would like to start like the panel with the 3 panelists. The panel will be opened by Trudy Peterson, who will explain how archives can contribute to peace, or what the link is from the work actually of an archivist to peace. And she will also give some examples of her work experience. And then we will dive into two contexts from Guatemala and Sudan. We'll hear the experience from the Historical Archive of the National Police, as already mentioned, and also from the Sudanese archives. José Rodolfo Kepfer and Monaim Adam will explain how these two archives contribute to truth, memory, and justice in their respective contexts. What are or were the challenges they are facing during this work, and what are possible lessons learned that could be useful also for other contexts. I will always try to encourage the interventions of each of them with some trigger questions. So, and for the audience, please don't forget to ask your questions in the chat. So let's start with Trudy Peterson. Trudy is an archival consultant and certified archivist. She spent 24 years with the US National Archives. She was the founding executive director of the Open Society Archives in Budapest, then director of archives and records management for the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. She consulted with truth commissions in South Africa and Honduras, the Special Court for Sierra Leone, only to mention a few. And she also worked for 3 years with the police archives in Guatemala. Mm-hmm. So Trudy, thank you very much for being here. And I have the 3 guiding questions for you. Mm-hmm. One, could you explain how archivists can contribute to peace? Or more in general, what is the link from the work of an archivist to peace? Then the second one, well, you have been working on this nexus of archives, transitional justice, peace building for a very long time. And you have also consulted with truth commissions, special courts, etc. And the question is, has the awareness of the importance of preserving archives and records of human rights violations increased in the past years? And if yes, why? And if not, what can local, national, or also international actors do to raise the awareness about the issue? And the third question, also based on your experience in different contexts, what are like the most important points you would advise to actors who use archives or who want to use archives as a tool to promote peace in their respective countries? Thank you.
Thank you, Corsine. It's a real pleasure to be with everyone this morning for me, this afternoon for you. I want to talk this morning briefly about peace as a process and archives as they relate to stages in that process. Now, we also all know that archives are neutral. It is the use of them that is not neutral. Archives in peace processes are often used for situations where they had never been anticipated. Sometimes you find that archives are used for not good processes. In the mid-1980s, I was in the Second Historical Archives in China, which had big charts up on the wall of how many researchers they served each month and each year. And there was a gap for the period of the Cultural Revolution. And I said, why were you closed? And they said, well, yes, except we weren't closed for Red Guards who could come in and look up whomever they wanted and the backgrounds of the people there. That certainly wasn't anybody's intention when they created the records that are in the Second Historical Archives. And it's an example of how archives can be used for bad as well as for good. So let me talk about archives and peace building. That is the short term, quite immediate after conflict period, and peacekeeping, which I'm going to argue extends till today in every country in the world, including mine. So let me talk a little bit about peace building and the ways that archives figure in it. We all, I suspect, are familiar with the general 4 areas in which peace building is said to occur. That is courts, understanding what truth is, and that usually is discussions of truth commissions, vetting to make sure that people who were in the old regime don't take part in the new, and also reform of the institutions, and then fourth, reparations in some ways. We have found over time that courts do not usually come into being immediately. Colombia is an exception here, but usually there is an extended period before courts begin to deal with the cases that have arisen during the period of conflict. We saw just recently that the very first case of the Kosovo court has just opened, and yet that's a conflict that's over 20 years old. So while we always talk about courts as a peace building operation, it tends to be so slow that it becomes part of what I would say is peacekeeping. Truth commissions, however, are something that comes quite quickly, typically, and they use an enormous variety of records. And I will try to point out that in truth commissions, you use a variety of records, whether it is from NGOs, whether it is from churches, whether it is from businesses, whether it is from individuals. It is not all government records. In fact, usually truth commissions can't get to government records or can only get to a very few of them, and usually have to begin with records that have been compiled by NGOs and to some extent by international partner organizations or international intergovernmental organizations now, like the United Nations. An example, however, of a truth commission that has come very late and is making important progress is one in Canada on what has happened in the schools that were set up for Native peoples, where children were taken from their families and placed into schools. Those schools finally closed in about 1996. It took another 20 years almost for a truth commission on the Canadian Native school system to be established, and the work is continuing to play out. One of the interesting points of that truth commission is that, yes, while the government established those schools and the government records were important, many of the records are in churches because churches, especially the Catholic Church, ran the schools. And so there has been a long struggle to decide whether or not the Catholic Church records would be made available to the commissioners of the Truth Commission, and then how they would be used. And it's a struggle that really, honestly, is not complete till today, even though the end of the commission is a number of years in the past. Vetting, another thing that has to really happen quickly if you're going to make sure that people from the old regime don't come into the new, was often called lustration in Eastern Europe. And that, of course, used records of the banned, the now banned organizations, whether it was the police or used police records like Stasi records to see if people had been members of a party that was not now permitted to have members into the government. That was true in the Czech Republic, or Czechoslovakia, as it was called then as well. So in the case of vetting, where you're trying to make sure that people in the new government are not indeed from the old, records play an important part, and they play an important part very quickly. And then there's missing persons. And missing persons, of course, is very, very much a condition that begins immediately. Where are these people? And lasts until they are found. We just saw within the past month that a group of Syrians who have missing family members have appealed to the United States saying, you have records that you picked up from ISIS, and we know you picked them up. You picked them up during conflict. You picked up paper records, you picked up computers, you picked up other kinds of material that would help us look for the missing. And we ask that you open it now so that we can try to find our missing persons. here's a case where it isn't government records and it isn't NGO records. It is a dissident faction or a rebel faction. And we know rebel factions, especially large ones, like the FARC, like ISIS, keep records. And those records, when they are found, are an important part of indeed the process of building peace. Now, archives also play a part in the peace building process by doing documenting. And archivists try to make sure that, for example, demobilization is well understood and well documented. So those records can be used in the future if there becomes a question as to whether this person or this group was indeed demobilized. Structural reform has to be documented. In the case of Latvia, the early drafts of their new constitution were on a computer system that weren't saved. So you can't tell where the early ideas of the Constitution came from. And then you have the questions of constitutional reform, but you also have the structural reform. And all of those are places where you need to immediately make sure the documentation is in place. And that's a job that archivists and records managers need to take on as duty bearers for human rights. And then also in that immediate peace building era, you need to make sure that preservation of the records, especially of these temporary bodies, the temporary courts, the temporary truth commissions, temporary commissions on the missing, are all well documented, and there is a strategy that already is developed for what's going to happen to them at the end. I have been involved in a number of cases where at the end of a truth commission, at the end of a special commission, CSIC in Guatemala, for example, there is the question, well, how do we get these preserved? And how do we get them to where they're going to be preserved? And it seems to me that it's essential that people, especially involved in these temporary peace building operations, figure out at the start who is going to take the records when those entities close down. Now let's move briefly to what I call the peacekeeping activities. And that's courts everywhere. Courts such as the court that tried Chad's dictator, Hissène Habré, used records of the police from Chad that were found in 2002. And they were an essential part of that court case. And that court case did not happen right away. It happened some years later, and of course was successful eventually. But we also are seeing things like the International Criminal Court just announced that it was going to investigate Philippine President Duterte and the extrajudicial killings that have plagued the Philippines. But they're also going to go back and look at his period as mayor of the southern city of Davao. He was mayor there for almost 20 years before he became Philippine president, starting back in the 80s. And so the records of his police in Davao and his administration in Davao are going to be examined now by the International Criminal Court. And there's an example of older records that are going to be very contemporary for peace building activities, but also for peacekeeping activities. I did a lot of work in the Marshall Islands on the tests that the US ran from 1946 to 1958. Some 66, 67 nuclear tests were exploded in the Marshall Islands, which affected everyone living there. And it wasn't until the mid-1990s that a compensation commission was set up. And for the compensation commission for the harm that was done by the nuclear tests, we used everything from a lot of medical records, which we had to gather from hospitals in the Philippines, hospitals in the United States. We used US government records. We used personal records. We used local records where someone had actually kept a record of who owned what property where and had done drawings. So in that case, we had organization records, we had private records, and we had government records, all brought together in the reparations process. If I could solve one problem around the world right now, I would solve the problem of land titling. Many conflicts all over the world exist because of lacking or poor land titling practices. This is especially true in the Amazon, where we see it in both Brazil and Colombia as an enormous problem, where businesses, unscrupulous individuals try to take over land that belongs to indigenous peoples, but we see it in other places as well. There's conflict over land in South Korea right now, over land that was given to refugees that fled from North Korea at the end of the Korean War. So we see questions of who owns what piece of land that arise all over the world. It creates conflict between businesses and indigenous people, between governments and landowners. And if I could solve one, I would solve that one. And it is one where both records management, that is getting a good record system in place, is important. And it is one where keeping it up to date is important. And this is true whether it is an electronic system or a paper system. I talked to a man who was involved in putting an electronic system into for land titling into a province in Pakistan. He said we were taking the records out of buildings with dirt floors, and we were scanning them, and then we were putting them back. And I said, you're putting them back in those same conditions? He said, oh yeah, we have a scanned copy. I said, well, is the scanned copy one that is valid for your court system? Can you use it? Oh, I don't know, but we'll get it scanned. No, you can't do that. You gotta think in the long term. If you're going to keep peace, how are these records going to be preserved? How are they going to be used? And how can they legally be used? Let me make two final points, and then I need to leave for a moment. First, it is important to think about the chain of custody of materials. It's one thing to talk about who has access to the paper, who holds it, and who can change it, who can add to it, who can subtract to it. It's another thing to talk about who can manipulate an electronic system, who has the authority to go in and change it, who has the authority to delete things from it, who has the security for it, and is it so insecure that it can be hacked into and changed from the outside without the people who have the actual permission to do so. So what we saw was when the photographer, who is codenamed Caesar, brought photographs out of dead persons from military custody in Syria in 2013, it took a great amount of effort with technical experts to say, are these indeed legitimate? Are these real? Can we rely on them in court processes? The answer finally was yes. But here's a case where, yes, you knew the chain of custody, but you didn't know what had happened in that electronic system after the copies were made. So finally, let me come back to where I started, which is that peace is a process. We saw just this week that Lebanon, which ended its civil war in 1990, broke out into armed conflict again in the streets. We hope it's over. We don't know. But peacekeeping is something we all have to work at all the time. We had a riot here in the United States on the 6th of January at the end of an election that some people didn't like the outcome. We have to keep peace. We have to figure out how to do that, whether it is in a brand new democracy or an old established one. It is up to all of us. Peace is a process, and it's a never-ending process. Peace is not a problem to be solved. It's a process to be managed. Archives are very good sources for understanding that process, both for peace building, for peacekeeping, and for understanding the history of us all. I like to quote the El Salvadorian Truth Commission that said as its foreword, all these things happened among us, and they do, and we have to remember that. Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much, Trudy, for this very interesting input. And now we see at least a little bit the relationship now between archives and peace building, peacekeeping. And Trudy mentioned some of the activities where archives are quite relevant, for example, for illustrations, vetting, for courts, truth commissions, missing persons commissions, reparations programs, and that they are also quite relevant for a lot of conflicts related to land titles. And that is that, or what she mentioned, what is quite interesting, that it's not always only about state archives, but there are a lot of different archives and documentation that are relevant for these kind of processes, may it be from private persons, civil society organizations, churches, rebel groups, hospitals, or also business records. Now I would like to dive into another example of, well, this specific example of the historical archive of the National Police of Guatemala, that is State Archive. We will hear José Rodolfo Kepfer, who will share his experience of the work he has done for this archive. José Rodolfo Kepfer worked in transitional justice processes related to the armed conflict in Guatemala for the past 15 years. He has worked for several years at the Historical Archive of the National Police, and drawing from the documents of this archive, he has also served as an expert witness in legal cases of enforced disappearances. And currently he's a student of the master's program in international law and human rights, at the United Nations University for Peace. Jose, thank you very much also to you for being here. And I also have 3 guiding questions for you. One is, can you briefly explain what the Historical Archive of the National Police does or is? And can you give concrete examples how this archive contributes to peace? Then the second one is, can you give us concrete examples of some of the challenges this archive has faced or is facing, and how were they addressed or overcome? And then the third one, based on your work experience with the police archive, can you draw some lessons learned from Guatemala and the police archive, which could be useful for other actors or other contexts? Thank you.
Thank you, Corsin. Good morning, everyone. It is a pleasure for me to be here from Costa Rica in Central America. Thank you very much to the Agencia de Cooperación Catalana and to Swisspeace for this invitation to be part of this panel, and for everybody for your attention. Before I address this specific question that Corsin asked me, I would like to make a brief introduction before I go into the archive's experience. And well, one cannot understand the importance of the document that the archive of the Guatemala's National Police Historical Archive had if we don't understand the fact that this country had a war for 36 internal armed confrontation for 36 years. In Guatemala, 2 truth commissions took place. One of them was sponsored by the United Nations. The other one came from the efforts of the Catholic Church. In both of their reports, they address an ample spectrum of perspectives to comprehend what happened during those years, and from the historical roots of the conflict to the process that led to signing the peace accords in 1996. For the research, they couldn't use pretty much any official document. These were systematically denied by the authorities, and only a handful of them was accessible for the truth commissions to work on them. And so their principal source of information were testimonies of victims, of people who had somehow been a victim to gross violations of human rights. Both Truth Commission documented tens of thousands of gross violations, including, well, summary execution, massacres, forced disappearances, sexual abuses, illegal adaptations of children, and genocide. We, in 2013, for the first time in the world history, the head of state was charged by a national court, and he was found guilty. And then, well, the story goes on. But in 2005, the Ombudsman's office ran across or accidentally found more than 80 million documents that were produced and were stored by the National Police in Guatemala. This was its historical archive. And since then, and after long and diligent technical and political work, these documents have had an enormous contribution in terms of building peace in Guatemala. So moving into Corsin's questions, I would like to start by sharing with you all a couple of examples of how the archive, Guatemala's National Police Historical Archive, has contributed to peace. Maybe I'm going to organize my ideas in thinking in contributions to truth and contributions to justice. So in terms of the right to know the truth of what happened during the war, during the armed confrontation in Guatemala, the archive has provided relevant information to understanding how the police operated. The police was the second most important state security agency in terms of their involvement in the war in Guatemala. And from the documents of the archive, there have been dozens of publications regarding the role of the police, special reports on specific divisions, or technical reports on archival matters. A second contribution would be that the archive helped to push the importance of the work done by archivists in Guatemala. Tens of people were trained there. There was some international specialization courses that occur with an international university in Latin America, and several different levels, different activities and different programs were drafted between the National University and the National Police Historical Archive, and this lifted the importance of the work of archivists, something that in our country did not happen. Here in Guatemala, there is no culture of preserving documents, so it was a huge step in terms of contributions to the archive. And I think a very important contribution in terms of truth is the provision of official documents to the relatives of people that were victims of state repression. For example, mothers who came looking for their missing sons or disappeared sons, and not all the time, but in some opportunities, the access to public information unit of the archive could provide one document, two documents that stated that this person had been detained by the police, and it was very strong moments. I remember tears from those mothers, but those were tears of joy, tears of relief, tears of knowing that what they have known for years has an official record to back this, right? In terms of justice, well, the documents from the archive had been used in dozens of criminal proceedings. Some of them have reached sentences. Others are still on the process. And these documents have been useful to shed light to the understanding of judges and how different levels of involvement of the police are proved, from regular agents to the institutional level. As a matter of fact, there's been one national director of the police who has been condemned for disappearances, and the documents of the archive were crucial in this process. But it's important to know that statistically, the most important users of information from the archive were first the prosecutor's office or the public ministry, second the ombudsman's office, the human rights defender's office, and in the third place, the families of victims of repression as a group. In the second question asked by question is in terms of the challenges the archive has faced and how we have dealt with them. In the first place, the documents were found in a very deplorable condition. They were infested by any kinds of plagues, rats, cockroaches, bats, fleas, you name it. And so this meant a lot of technical expertise and resources that Guatemala did not have, or the archive, well, the archive didn't exist as a preservation project, let's say, or institution. So there was an enormous task, and we had to understand those documents first from the history of the police onto the information that was provided by the documents, to be able to clean them, to organize them, to digitize them, to preserve them, and then to make them accessible to the public. And well, the archive faced this challenge, or try to resolve the solution by networking into different levels, from local organizations to international cooperation agencies. As Kate Doyle from the National Security Archive said, there was a careful assessment of the task at hand. This was followed by a strategic plan to retrieve the documents, safeguard the site, consult with national and international experts. Records were placed in order in accordance with strict archival standards, and that possibility to keep the records in an archival matter was only possible because we seek for advice from experts, and that's something that really made a difference. There was also another challenge in terms of safeguarding those documents, especially the ones that were digitized, because we knew that the political conditions could change at any moment, and the archive constantly faced the political risk. So efforts were made in terms of finding safe haven for those archives that were at risk. We found a couple of universities in the United States and a governmental agency in the country from Europe who has a copy of this 17 million documents that have been digitized so far. And this is really important in terms of, the preservation, but also in terms of the political backing that these documents have, because authorities now know that there's a copy. And currently, the archive is, I would say, facing its most difficult phase in its 16 years of existence. The Guatemalan government has a very, let's say, regressive stand in terms of impunity. And so access has been blocked to the archive, kind of, well, not literally, but substantively they have, because, for example, before you could go researching into the archive and there would be personal explaining you how to understand the documents and everything. Now you go there, you are pretty much alone into an ocean of 17 million copies of documents. It's really hard. And however, again, networking is it's key here. This is not something that is being faced by the archive per se, but by organizations and people who are related or believe into what the archive represents. And we started networking to present this legal action against the official ministry that are in charge of the archive now, and eventually the National Supreme Court of Justice granted full protection to the documents, and now it has been declared a national heritage, Guatemala national heritage. This is another category of protection and another discussion, but networking again has been key. And the third question, my friends, was from my experience, if I can draw some lessons learned, I would say that most likely there will be technical, economic, and political challenges to face. And we learned a lot of lessons in all these three dimensions. But maybe I could sum these lessons in three ideas. The first would be the need for political clarity and the importance of building a network to protect the archives in case they face any kind of risk. The second one would be the convenience of strengthening internal capacities. And I mean in terms of, in technical terms, archival, for example, but also in terms of being capable to constantly analyze the conflicting nature of that archives that hold information related to human rights violations have. There's an inherent conflict in terms of those groups who want to disclose information and those groups who does not want to disclose information. And that's something that is constantly evolving and changing, especially in the South world or countries like Guatemala and Sudan and other countries where, political conditions can change. And these records face a lot of challenges and risks. And the third one would be, there's the need to, or an ability to maneuver in obtaining resources. From our experiences, this was really something that was always something that we always had to deal with, the fact that resources were needed and they were scarce, and we had to look for allies to keep these efforts going. And that's pretty much an art, really. So this would be the three main ideas that I would think of as lessons learned from our experience. So yes, I would like to close maybe with a phrase in terms of, that the idea is to be informed, prepared, and connected, so that when a regressive situation threatens the documents and their access, we as archivists and activists and people involved in these processes can turn into those networks of solidarity and common political understanding of things to try to safekeep them. So thank you very much, and I would like to address any questions if there are when they come. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jose, for for your input. It's really interesting to see how the police archive in Guatemala now contributed to peace, or tried to contribute to peace in this country. And as you mentioned, now mainly with regard to the right to know, let's say, to know what happened to the thousands of victims of the armed conflict, that victims or relatives had access to the documents, etc., and also all the judicial cases where documents from the police archives were used. And then obviously also all the challenges that you mentioned. And it's interesting to see, even though the conflict officially ended in '96, that the archive faced quite a lot of challenges, and especially like in the last 3 years, also for the political situation in the country. So thank you, Jose, and we'll probably have some questions later on, but I would like to go to Monim Adam now, who will share the experience of the Sudanese archive in Sudan. I don't know, maybe you are facing some similar challenges as in Guatemala. Looking forward to your input. Monim is a Sudanese lawyer by training. He worked as a human rights lawyer before domestic courts, supporting local NGOs, and served as a legal advisor and consultant to international organizations. He's manager and project director of Sudan Archives and the Human Rights Hub. He graduated with a Master of Laws in International Law and Human Rights in 2017, and since then supports accountability mechanisms and human rights practice in post-war Sudan. So Monim, thank you for being here today with us. And also for you, I have 3 guiding questions. The first one, can you briefly explain what the Sudanese archive does? And can you give us concrete examples how this archive contributes to peace? The second, can you give us as well concrete examples of the challenges of this archive and how they were addressed or overcome? And the third one, also based on your experience, can you draw some lessons learned which could be useful for other contexts and actors? Thank you, Monim.
Thank you, Christian, and thank you, everyone. I'm happy to be here today. Hi, everyone. Good morning and good afternoon. Yeah, I would like just to start. Actually, yesterday I visited the Stasi Museum in Germany, and it was, yeah, just like brought me back home, just like how to see that could be an experience where we can take it back to Sudan. Yeah, as the introduction, I'm from Sudan, and I would like just to give a brief about the country status regarding archive and conflict and conflict resolution and all that. Sudan, yeah, gained the independence in mid last century, but since that and before as well, during the colonial time, it suffered a lot from missing documents. Like there is no any proper documentation happened in Sudanese history. Only a few of them that like remain in British, some museums in England and some museums here and there as well. But generally in Sudan, there is like a huge lack of documentation, which is just that help the issues to not to be resolved at all. Like just pull back all the peace process and acknowledging one another in the same country. In Sudanese archive, we started working as an organization to support the local organization to collect evidence, to help them how to understand the necessity and the importance of archive, and how that actually is something connected to justice, truth telling, and transitional justice effort. Now the country moving through transitional justice since 2020, after the revolution happened, after like a very, very long oppressive regime that ruled the country for 3 decades. That just now the country inherited a huge pain, and nobody knows how actually to address this because like lack of evidence and lack of supporting evidence and lack of understanding of the archives. In Sudan, there is very difficult history of that oppressive regime during the 3 decades, where people are really like ruled aggressively, and it was so difficult for people to be able to, you know, like maintain any evidence. There was like a regime. It has like a police. It was like a police state. Yes, there is an institution called National Intelligence and Security Services, which ruled the country during that time, detained, killed, and yeah, ruled with stick. So this actually helped us and just like moved us to be able to start this project, as like to help people and encourage them to be able to do sort of documentation and archiving. Our experience now actually been different from others. We have been working in different sections as like collecting open source data. We verify that, we archive it, and we share it with some colleagues. We share it with some other organizations as well. And we work as well primarily with oral history, as like to collect the oral history from people's memory, and just like we move from region to another region. This is in collaboration with other organizations as well. We try to collaborate as well with many organizations in different regions in Sudan in order to help them to collect the community-based archives, sort of anything that was collected during the wartime, where it was collected during different times in Sudan. So that just helps us to be able to make that at least like safe, or connect them with like another expertise around the world to help them how to be able to use that as a piece where it can be used later in a court of law. So those kind of things now what we really like focus on. The online gathering of that is happening every day, and we do it little bit with like a historical background, and we try to collect and trace how this document came, and then we verify them and we make it ready for different organizations to be used, or just we make it for history. We worked as well from the war area in Sudan, where we try to collect as many as possible evidence. It's like graphic. It's so difficult to work through that, and very many experts find it so difficult in order to be able to work in that kind of to work in that kind of material. But now we're trying just to use that. We have a huge collected data from the wartime, and which is just like now we're trying to make it useful for the transitional period, and make it as well useful for the criminal justice as well in Sudan. So those kind of like thematic area where we focus currently now. And the website as well is full of like some very few reports that we publish just to help people to enhance the knowledge and the community to understand how that works. There is generally in Sudan now a committee or different committees actually working to investigate some certain period of crimes, and as well different crimes as well took place in different period of time in Sudan, but they don't have expertise at all. They collect documents and just like they review some videos or some data and all that, they just with, you know, like very old school way of reviewing documents, and they're very like not into collaborating with others as well. So that is us make the country moving like very slowly towards peace or towards justice or towards transitional justice as well. And as well now there is this period, the transitional government trying to support the effort for human rights, and as well the effort for truth telling through the transitional justice process, where they have very many units where they can collaborate with NGOs, individuals, experts, internally and internationally, in order to be able to use archives, community-based archive as well. But the law didn't mention how that collaboration is supposed to happen. So we as well support that effort in order maybe to maintain the document or build a channel between the government and those committees where they try to collect and support the effort towards transitional justice. Some examples for that, we collected recently around 117 or 100 primary document as oral history from different war affected areas in Sudan. And we worked in that project with academia as well, how to collect that transcript it, and to make analysis for it in order to be shared in a dissemination phase, which is coming soon. We will be sharing that with organizations, and that will make that public, the findings, how to help people to understand actually this kind of documentation and archiving at the same time. As well, we were just like searching with different individuals who are like allegedly having some archives around the country, to encourage them in order just like to build their capacity in order to be able to use that, or to make it useful for other purposes as well, including legal, including for truth telling as well. So that kind of thing as well. This is the area. There are a lot of challenges in the country where it's difficult to be able to use the archives, because the National Archive in Sudan is really poor. Like it's like extremely poor. There is nothing actually that could be seen in that archive where it can be used for other purposes. Yes, there are like very many things that, but they're not connected to the period where it can help for justice or truth telling or transitional justice as well. So the main challenge in Sudan, the knowledge around archive itself, how people to understand that the archive is important for everything that's going forward. That is one of the huge challenges now we're facing. So we held these like bilateral meetings, some conference here and there. We do meetings with different organizations. We bring some experts to Sudan in order to be able to speak to different organizations, and as well to different individual that group and community leaders, in order to be able to take that archive they have and to make it to the public, or at least like to share it with some authorities, or to make it just safe, to preserve that in order to be able to be used later if any effort for any activities that's supposed to include or to benefit from that as an evidence before law. We had some very unique experience that the Sudanese law doesn't accept the visual evidence. We had 2 cases happened during the revolution time. We had like archived some videos from that, and we verified that, and we had some report about it, and then we shared that before court, where in Sudan, the legal as well, one of the challenges, the Sudanese evidence law and the Sudanese procedures law doesn't accept, or doesn't as well accept the visual evidence as evidence for before court, or the discretion for that is just based on the judgment. So we tried to use the open source data. We verified some videos and materials, and as well we did some analysis and some studies in order to be shared with the judge. And lucky enough that 2 cases were like really went through, and both of them the judges accepted the evidence. And now we're trying to use those kind of experience in order to move forward as like to build some idea of strategic litigation, how to use the open source data until later to be acknowledged before court, and just like maybe to push in advocacy move. I would like to help local to be able, like lawyers and like different advocates, and as well prosecutors, judges. We have now actually a project to work with all of them to bring them in one room and just to start to discuss the importance of archives, and to be able as well to bring the technical and the expert before court if the archive is difficult to understand, if any material that is difficult to understand as well, that to be because it is difficult to be able to get like accountability for some cases which is like happened long ago, happened against communities, or as Trudy mentioned earlier as well, something about land. There is a huge conflict happened in Darfur where lead the international community to involve, and then the International Criminal Court as well involved, and there is a genocide case opened, crimes against humanity as well. The main issue, it was like part of it, land, or after the war as well, people benefited from actually when the people forced to leave their villages, some new inhabitant, they came to those villages. Now there is no archive where people can know actually where like to run back to get those archives for their because the land registry in Sudan is as well has like very difficult way of making like certificates, and that is just like lost between those events, and it's now very, very impossible for people to be able to get the materials in order to be able to go back to their villages. Whereas like on the other hand, peace process transitional justice, part of it, people supposed to be able to go back to their villages, and that's just like it's not happening because of these challenges and because of that, like missing archive. As well, parallelly, so now we're working with these lawyers and prosecutors in order to make advocacy, or like the first step for that advocacy, and as well the step before leading some cases for strategic litigation, to help for to guide that process of getting some legal amendment regarding like how the court's supposed to be well equipped, because like courts as well domestically, they don't have the capacity in order to, you know, like to look into archives, even if like they're experts. They need like some special, you know, ways in which like how they can present those archives, like, or like the videos, or like, you know, pictures or something from the past, or something just like to be presented before court. If it is not in this like way of like ordinary materials, that's just going to be difficult for them. So the advocacy is going to be around that, how to make the courts well equipped, how to make judges as well, prosecutors and lawyers, to be able to understand the archive and the necessity of that piece as like to achieve justice or transitional justice. And as well for the future purposes, there is now, like as I mentioned, the Truth Commission, Truth-Telling Commission. Now they will just be faced the first time about like there is no documents available for them. It is huge challenge for them to be able to dig into, like there is no very clear archive in order for them to go back and get that. So now we're starting to do that all in order just like to help all organizations to be able to participate in that process, engaging with different as well international actors. That is, so like the challenges, if I wanted to summarize that, is legal as well. The law is very, very far from acknowledging or just like accepting the protection of, or like the preservation of the archives. Other challenges, all the knowledge. People, they really lack. There is like a huge gap of knowledge regarding people to understand how to use archives in all format. That is a great challenge for now as well. Nobody knows how to bridge that. And as well, there is no plan for it. That's the main challenge. So like there is like no, like there is no knowledge about like how those are important in order to achieve justice and to move forward as well. So according to our experience, we tried to build that, and we tried like to make this archive. Lucky enough, we have our small office in Germany, and as well we have different initiative and different collaboration and different as well relationship with different national experts that help us to be able as well to do that. So like we collect the document, we try to work through those documents, to study them, especially for the open source data. The open source data, because it's just not very strong and it's just weak evidence by its nature. So we tried as well to do like a study comparing different law history and as well jurisdictions, how they acknowledge that and how it is accepted before that, including the ICC, which is this like very fresh experience as well. And internationally, we look into very many different countries' experience regarding how to admit the open source data. And we tried that to push for that for now, and just to make our own curriculum in order to make people understand that more, and to encourage more as well people to go to study this kind of thing, to be more interested for them as well, to break it down into like very small courses in order for people to join different. We refer some like interested individuals to different partners in order to teach them how to be able to do like just the first step in archiving, or the first step in collecting the open source data as well. So that's like those the challenges they're all the time facing. But like now having office in Germany that allows the expert in Germany working with us to be able to work in a safe environment as well. One of the challenges, internet connection, the technical expertise that is like kind of resolvable here in Germany as well, is like more in Sudan. And that as well bring another challenge, like how to have that far archive or like the technical expertise very disconnected from the ground. That as well one of the challenges. We're working like hard to make that way in which like to bridge that gap, but it's as well happening. So we benefit from having a safe environment where the country now is undergoing a very fragile system. We don't know actually for sure if tomorrow is going to happen a coup or no. We don't know actually if the government as well in the coming future will allow those kind of as well activities or no. The main issue now in that will pull away the effort for peace and the country to move forward is like how to dig into the archive of the police. And that is no way to be accessible at all in Sudan. And we have that National Intelligence and Security Services. They've been ruling for 3 decades, and there is no any vision. Actually, when the transitional government came, the first thing they did, they changed the name of that institution. And after changing that name, just like that creates some chaos, like who's going to be able to trust or like to trace this information and to connect it with the old regime. So now that's the challenge, and that they have huge data about people, they've been detained, people being prosecuted, people being arrested, and people being like tortured. That data we have it like, you know, here and there between reports, but like to be able to dig into that archive that this institution has, that is like no way will be accepted. We are thinking about now actually that project to make it. It was very interesting for me to see the National Archive that was like did for I think Guatemala, the police, the online archive that one of the students did. I think it was very interesting, and as well one in Cambodia. They did like a small it's actually huge product as well, but it was like a student graduation project to do an online museum for the police for one prison. If we could just like be able to do that in Sudan, I think that's going to help to move forward fast towards peace and justice as well, and reconciliation, because having that history, people like very holding everything into themselves, and people that don't know about one another in the same country, that will just bring us back all the time with that legacy of being hurt and nobody like have the chance to listen to you. So for us now, the main lesson that we learned through this project, especially the last one, asking people questions about like their opinion, what's justice for them, what is transitional justice for them, how they feel embarrassed if something just happened to them, how they can feel and they could accept the reality that they're coming through that past and all this. It was very interesting experience asking them those questions. They felt they've been heard. And actually just some people, they smile, you ask them about like a very difficult and disturbing questions, they answer that. Some of them they cry, some of them they really feel threatened, some of them that just pull their memory. But the main thing that we learned, they feel at the end, just they thank the interviewer, they say thank you, I feel today I've been, you know, I've just given the chance to share my opinion and to share my feelings. And this is just a very unique experience. And I think for me personally, it was quite moving. And I think in that kind of situation, if people are given just the mic and just ask them, speak what you feel and just tell me how you feel now, and that kind of sympathy, I think that is just the huge and biggest step that can bring people to move forward. I think that is just like it was like one thing I really like learned from those like that process, and I feel it makes me always happy to feel somebody's happy that they just felt they've been they're given the chance to be heard. Thank you everyone, and yeah, I'm very happy to share that, and just like please let me know if any questions. I'll be very happy to come back as well again. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Moni. I just remind also the participants, if you want to ask questions, please just use the chat function. Well, thank you, Monin, for this very interesting input as well. It's interesting to see like this kind of other initiative or work that you are doing, not using directly, let's say, like in Guatemala, an archive that already exists, but doing a lot of documentation and collecting, especially also open source data. That's quite interesting, and with your oral archive. So I will move on to the questions. We don't have a lot of questions right now, but maybe one question that is in the chat is related also to the integrity and truthfulness, let's say, of the data. So I think Trudy shared a little bit about the chain of custody, etc. But maybe if maybe all of you could say something about this. How do you prove that the data is correct, that the data has the probative value also in front of courts, etc. I think this is probably also especially relevant if you are collecting like open source data. So I don't know if Monim, if you want to start, if there are specific protocols that you use, or how do you analyze the data so that it's real data as well. And then maybe afterwards, Trudy and Jose.
Sure. Yeah, we have internal protocol that mainly used by international experts, and as well that is coming. It's like the same protocol that's used by some academia, like some universities around the world, and we have that collaboration. So we do use very like proven apps that they get the metadata accurate, and we can check the accuracy. And as well, before the court, it not necessarily in like, especially in our case in Sudan, not necessarily to come and just like demonstrate how you verified the data, but like it is to show how the technical experts need it, and some expert to come and just like give the testimony around that very piece, how it should. And there is a very, very obvious cases like in Cameroon, that video was like used by BBC, which was like one of the interesting cases. And it was, I think, one of the first cases that used maybe in Africa, if I'm not mistaken. That was one of the best cases when the government disputed the video, and they said that video wasn't true. And then after some time, they come and admit it, and they brought before court the same people who appeared before the in the video, and they accepted the open source data, and they accepted the metadata that's come through. So I think as well, we have this protocol of Berkeley Human Rights Center. So that's as well coming from academia, was well as well respected. I think that is one of the things we really use, and that helps us to be able to prove the accuracy, or like how much that data is very accurate. Yeah, I think that's what I want to say. And as well, actually, if I could just say about the chain of custody as well, we have as well a forum shows how this material move from one place to another place, and how and actually the state from the first day where it was and until the end of that ending up before the court or something, and it's supposed to remain the same, or any changes happen, maybe some material supposed to, some changes expected. So that as well will be like able to trace that, and it will be just to get a testimony from some experts and all that. So I think that's just the way we do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Monim. Maybe Trudy, if you want to add to this.
Yes, I'm happy to. I'm sitting in a car right now, so if the background looks a little different, that's why. Yes, a couple of things. One is that over the course of time, those electronic materials will have to be migrated to new systems. There is no system that lasts longer than about 18 months. And so documenting not only how you got it and who has had access to it and when it went in and out of use is important, but you have to think long-term about the question of when do you update it and under what conditions, and make sure you really, really document those kinds of changes. The second kind of challenge I see is all of the leaked material. And it's one thing to pick up open source material that has been posted by someone who was at the scene of an event. It's another thing to take leaked material, such as we've just seen in Ukraine, where a massive leak of material was put out, some of which talked about the secret police tapping into the senior leaders of the church. And the government quickly came out and said, oh, it's false, it's falsified, it's fraudulent. And what they did then was they went to several people who were recorded in those conversations. It was wiretaps, and got the people to say, oh yes, that is an accurate rendering of the conversation I had with prelate so-and-so. But both of these, using leaked material and making sure that there is a plan, a documented plan for upgrading, is really important.
Okay, thank you very much. And maybe Jose, I know, well, you have been expert witness also in several cases against, of enforcers' appearances. And I assume that one of your roles during these cases was exactly to confirm that the documents that are used in this case, that they are trustworthy. Can you maybe tell us a little bit more about this?
Yes, thank you, Corsin. Well, it's something that Trudy already mentioned in terms of the chains of custody, and then on AIM also he spoke about expertise of witnesses. So those two ideas are interwoven together into how these documents can serve to ensure how can we ensure the integrity and truthfulness of this data, and how can it stand in trial, right, for court. And if there is an appropriate and documented chains of custody that guarantees where a document has been, whom has had access to it, and that's something that can prove all the different movements and access that a specific set of documents have had. And this is very important in terms of the authenticity of the document and how it cannot be challenged, or it can be, but it can be answered about it. And expert witnesses become important in terms of sometimes, for example, in archive like the Guatemala's Historical Archive of the National Police, it's the dimensions of documents is such that to be able to provide light into the understanding of particular situation that is of the interest of a court, you need to draw from an archival understanding of the documents. You need to understand the institution from its document, how it communicated within it to the external organization, how the chain of command is reflected in the document, how the functions, the legal functions, any legal function that it had. And all this information comes only by understanding those documents in their archival context. And then after this is done, after a group of persons have reached this understanding, they become able to contextualize series of documents, or particular documents, into this institutional archival framework, and therefore translated, let's say, to other parties in a legal process to understand any specific question. So it is, I think that the idea is that the way that these archives the way that an expert witness can help a court to understand the importance of the documents comes from the archival understanding of them. So it is very important to build in this institutional knowledge. Yeah. and this is something that had happened in Guatemala, for example. There were a dozen people, maybe more, that had been working with these documents since the beginning of the recovery process, and who came to have a pretty informed understanding of the institution and of its archive. And unfortunately, well, unfortunately, they are no longer working in the archive because of political reasons. And now the archive has lost somehow this capacity to rely on expert witnesses to understand the documents in terms of a legal proceeding. So this internal capacity that was built it is there, but it's kind of outside of the institution. So it's not an internal capacity anymore. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, I think most of the questions that have been posed in the chat have been answered, I think, during the input, but maybe I'll just use my role as moderator to ask an additional question. And I think Monaim, you mentioned it, and also Jose, that at the end also it's sometimes maybe difficult to work with this kind of archives because there is also a lot of sensitive information in it. And it really also depends a little bit on the political situation in your country. And I assume that it can also be risky for you as persons to work with this kind of documents and use these kind of documents also in judicial cases or in general for peace building activities. So if you could say something about maybe the personal risks as well and how you deal with these kind of risks. I don't know who wants to start. Or maybe Monaim, you can start. I think Jose has problems with the internet.
Sure. Yeah, for example, as I mentioned, we have a huge archive actually that from the war affected areas that have been collected throughout the last 10 years of that war. It is quite graphic. It affects people emotions when they really work through that. Is so difficult in most cases, like just brain trauma, even if like the person is not connected to that country at all, but it just that it has that kind of sensitive nature of it. And the other thing as well, it brings people's privacy. I mean, somebody is speaking from, like, and you see the person, and actually that's just happened recently as well. The person is still alive in most cases. So as well, actually, to use that very sensitive information, even if like for the purpose of the analysis, and then just like to be able to deliver that to a court of law or something, that is in most cases as well risky. We try to avoid doing that in most cases. Like we have a huge archive, but we really like be trying to consult with very many other partners in order to navigate through that. And as well, the people who are collecting this data are supposed to be, because the conflict as well happened recently, and the violation as well happened recently, or it's like some is like still ongoing. The perpetrators as well holding power still now. So that makes it more sensitive, and just like people supposed to be very, very aware of that nature of it's risky. And as well, that document is fragile by its nature itself. It might just like get lost or, get like spoiled or like inaccessible, or just something like that could happen as well. So those kind of things is just really sometimes affect that kind of sort of documentation archives as well. So it's very sensitive. It requires a lot of attention in order to make it successful or useful as well in most cases. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Yes, in Guatemala, the information that the documents from the national police had, it was very sensible in terms of the involvement of especially the police, but all other security agencies in gross violations to human rights. So of course, when documents were being organized and when they started providing information to truth efforts and justice efforts, there started to be some acts of intimidation. And yeah, for example, I remember a couple of colleagues being, yeah, there was like some vigilance on them, threatens, letters, columnists in newspapers, and always with a discourse that tries to put this defending human rights activities in the same level of those internal enemies that the state fought against during the armed confrontation. So this symbolic violence that is there, and it's being built against these kinds of efforts. And this subjective, direct violence that can threaten you critically, and you have to deal with. So I remember that there was a time where at the archive there were these sessions of psychosocial support for workers in the archive. We had I don't know, every 15 days, something like that, we have this group session where we came and we shared our experiences, not only in terms of security, but in terms of the information we were reading, right? I mean, if you're all the time reading about gross violations of human rights, people disappear, people arrested, people, bodies in the street and everything, it's traumatic. So there's something that has to be dealt with. And I think by creating this appropriate and directed by people who understands about these psychological issues and social issues, it is a good way to give a window for these feelings to go out from you into a good conversation. And yes, of course, there's the need to have like protocols of security, for example, chains of callings in case of a particular risk, chains of phone calls, sharing information. Again, this kind of the idea that I close with is to constantly be analyzing the context in which the archive operates, how it is changing, how maybe certain groups that are adverse to what the archive is doing has gained more or reduced their political power, because this changes over time, over governments, etc., at least in contexts like Guatemala. And this constant analysis is also very useful in terms of facing these kinds of subjective and symbolic violence that takes place. So it is something that I think we kind of did here, and it works. Fortunately, there were no events that we must regret or any sorry issues. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Maybe we still have 5 minutes for just the last question. One thing is always a little bit to find what I'm thinking, that's to find a balance between like privacy or data privacy, and also like access to information that is relevant. So I don't know if you, from your experience, how have you dealt like with this kind of issues in your organizations? Maybe Trudy as well, how, if from your experience with maybe in other contexts, how this has been dealt with, or what are like the main issues regarded to finding this balance? I don't know if Trudy, if you may want to start, and then Jose and Monet. Oh, I think we lost Trudy.
Okay.
So,
yeah.
Maybe Jose, do you want to start? Yes.
Thank you, Corsin. Yes, I would have liked to hear Trudy's experience in CISUBRA. She's worked in different contexts and everything, but from what I'm experiencing, I say, yes, there is, of course, the legal national framework. What does the laws in terms of access to information, public information says in Guatemala when it comes to information that is somehow related to human rights violations is pretty much open. But this doesn't mean that there is not sensible but private information that should be protected. So maybe after looking into this national legal frame, it is convenient to look for international standards, international practices. And in the end, well, this is a personal understanding. I think that when it comes to information relating to public officials that were somehow related to the commissions of human rights, I would say access, full access, but I don't know, and protecting particular data of individuals. So it's something that most of the times it has to be very locally contextualized, but it is convenient to look into international standards. Thank you.
From our experience, I think, as I mentioned earlier, we have a huge gap of legal expert in this area, and the law is really like not hitting at all in that area, because as well the practice is not there. So as like, yeah, they don't see the practitioners any like need for approaching, but I think like the law is very, very strict like regarding the sensitivity about this data. Last year, there was like some articles amended regarding the use of internet and the publication. It can affect as well to some extent the work that the archivist might do, or like any research that might be carried around this area. But I think we're still very far from that development. And as I mentioned earlier, I was like yesterday in the Stasi Museum, and Trudy as well spoke earlier about the archive of the KGB, for example, in Latvia or somewhere. I studied in Latvia as well, so I have connection between this Latvia and Germany and Sudan. So I think that in Latvia as well, the law is very far from pushing and helping the practitioners as well. So I think, yeah, for me, I hope we could just like, maybe if she joined, maybe she could just like add to that as well. But yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I think the official time we had for this webinar is over already. I think Trudy was not able to join again. I assume that she has some issues, but well, from my side, I think I would just like to thank you very much, José Rodolfo and Monin, for your very interesting inputs, and also for your time today. I think it was a quite enriching and interesting discussion. Although obviously it's always a little bit more difficult to only have this kind of discussions online. And I hope that we can maybe have another time that we can follow up on the discussions also in person. And I think I will just briefly give the word to Carmen, if you want to add something as well from your side.
Just thank you very much for this very interesting conversation. It was great to hear about your experiences and just learning from all of that, and hope to see you soon presentially. Okay.
Okay. Well, thank you very much also to the attendees. I hope you had an interesting discussion as well, and I wish you all a very nice morning, afternoon, evening, and good luck with the rest of the conference as well, for those who attend other webinars and meetings in person in Barcelona. Thank you very much.